Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are very glad to have you with us as always here at the studio and also at 92.1. Our partners that we are on that network on Saturdays starting at 12 o'clock, and we're very glad to have them aboard. The partnership that we have with them is working really well for both of us, and we're very glad to have the constituents they have there. I do think that 92.1 is one of the premier stations in the local community, and they're making a lot of noise out there in terms of the things they're doing. Their programming is excellent, and we tune in to the programs over there. They have a program that comes on right before this program comes on Saturday, and it's called Whose Opinion Is It Anyway? And that program has one of my friends on it, and I'm very glad to hear his voice right before we go on the air. And we are going to make some noise here as well. Well, let's see what we're going to talk about today. I want to take another shot at what is happening now on the national landscape. Everybody's talking about the government shutdown. I think the first shutdown the country had was in 1976. I don't think there was a government shutdown before that. But the government never shuts down. And if you notice, when they had the last shutdown in 2013, they were talking about the shutdown being really a layoff or what they call non-essential federal employees. And the thing that really grabbed my attention was that after the shutdown was over, after declaring the ones that were laid off were non-essential, once the layoff had taken place, and then the government was opened back up with the 800 and some odd thousand non-essential workers, I was noticing that all of them were brought back, and they had said to us that they weren't really essential. The question then became, why would we have them in the government if they're not essential to the delivering of services to the American people? Then why do we have this bloated bureaucracy that is not essential? And if you're going to lay them off and don't need them during the time when the money is the purse strings have been tightened, then why would you bring them back? And we know that this government is very bloated, and what is it now? 2.15 million persons working in the government. I think the federal government is larger than any corporation that we have in the country. I think the next largest business entity, the largest business entity in the country is Walmart. And I think that they have somewhere around that, I think somewhere around 2 million persons that are employed throughout the nation. But the federal government has more than 2 million persons working in the federal structure. I
remember reading an almanac that was up in my grandparents' house, and it was like from the 1970s. And General Motors was actually considered, a huge employer. I mean, way more than the federal government at that point. And actually, for all purposes, it was almost like a country within a country. Mm-hmm. It had its own loss prevention, or security. It had its own firefight, and it had a massive. I mean, the amount of payroll went through there was at the level. Let's see, that was the better paying jobs. And now look at the transition. You just stated that Walmart's probably the biggest employer in the country. Yeah. And they don't make as much as the factory workers did in the General Motors plant. So just look at the transition from the 1970s to the current situation too, and that is a cause of shift too of the standards of living amongst all the people. Mm-hmm. So I mean that's a humongous change. Yeah, it is, and for the private sector to have that number of employees, that downsizing will be based upon whether or not it can be afforded. Because if they're not making a profit, then those businesses cannot continue to operate. But unlike the federal government, where if it does not run efficiently because of the size of the government, and we all know the government is bloated, it can just simply reach into the taxpayer's pocket because the federal government does not have to turn a profit. It simply can place the burden of its actions and its bloated size upon the taxpayers. And that's why government is so large. If they had to put these immigrants
in the basement of these politicians, I can guarantee you that the immigration problem would be fixed overnight. But whatever the cost of that immigration will be can be passed off to further burden the taxpayers. As long as that's the case, you'll have this kind of irresponsible conduct that we see going on right now. There's no reason for the federal government to be closed for any reason with the amount of money that they're taking from the taxpayers. And I would put it as taking the money from taxpayers, because none of us are really voluntarily giving up of our money at this level of taxation that we're being burdened with by the federal government. What, 30-some-odd% of our income going toward paying federal taxes, and that does not include the amount of taxes we're paying at the other levels. We are overtaxing this country, and the burden of that is because the government is bloated, and we're bloated because these politicians are basically out of control. I was listening to John Kennedy, the one that is the senator, Republican senator in Louisiana, and he was saying that the country was founded by geniuses and is now run by idiots. And I would accept that as part of a description of what is really happening in the country, but I don't think that's as exact and as accurate as a description that I would give it. I think that certainly these persons are not the smartest persons to run anything, and I don't think any of them would be able to run anything in the private sector, because you make the kind of decisions you're making in the government, you made that in the private sector, you would be going out of business, because you cannot make these inefficient decisions and then continue to do business, because profit has to be turned in order for the business to be viable. So they can pass their mistakes off to the voters, but if you're running a business, you cannot pass it off to your customers, because they'll just refuse to do business for you. If you're raising your prices above the prices of the competitors, they can just simply go elsewhere, and that they don't have the luxury. But in terms of the persons that are running the government being idiots, I think that's being kind to them. These persons are not the smartest persons. That's a given. But these people are not just idiots. These people are thugs. Anytime you have a government putting its citizens last and closing services down because of something that they're trying to get accomplished for those who are not even citizens of the country, then you can forget this idea that you're being represented, because how are you being represented when someone else who's not even a citizen, their concerns come before the concerns of the citizens of this country? How does that happen?
Well, see,
how does that work?
A lot of libertarians, I have an issue with this. Some of these libertarians have a thing that there should be no borders, there should be no, I mean, they also will add too, if you de-incentivize it by not, encouraging people to come here because, the welfare programs we have, if you just knock them all out and destroy them, they're de-incentivize many of them for coming here. And I see the case of that, but a lot of people out there think that if you bring up your own concern for your own population, your own existence, you're racist. As soon as you bring that up, I mean, the things are not fluctuating. They're the ones always yammering about social injustice and the disparity between the income and distribution in this country. But when you put in a group of people who are now going to probably be the most preyed upon people for actually being a source of cheaper labor, how's that not going to affect the people who are already established workers and that shift them out of their jobs? How's that not going to happen? Yeah, and the idea of having open borders, I would agree with Stefan Melanow, the philosopher in Canada, on this point. You cannot have both open borders and a welfare state. You have to have one or the other. If you're going to have open borders, then you have to close down the welfare state, because the welfare state would be a way of, it's like a magnet that draws people to the country, because when they get here, they don't have to do anything based on their own merit. And what they add to the country that they're joining on to, they in fact consume the benefits based upon the largesse of the government. And of course, government likes to do that, because what it does, it gains some supporters at the cost of the taxpayers. In other words, you are socializing the cost and privatizing the benefit
to the politicians. We don't benefit from it. The politicians benefit, because anyone that's giving out the benefits to the incomers, they're going to vote for that particular party. And I think another thing that we need to look at as far as immigration is concerned, now that we're talking about that, is that in immigration, what we are doing here is that we are actually hurrying up the process of fundamentally transforming this nation. I heard somebody say on radio as I was coming to the studio that this is an attack upon the institution of this country by bringing people in here who would not have known anything about the founding fathers of this nation, and the things they set in motion through the Constitution mandates. They won't have that background if they come in from elsewhere. They bring in the background of how things operate in the countries they left to come to the United States. And if they're not really grounded in the history of this country, why would they want to maintain the traditions of the country if they're not really beholden to those traditions? So so what we see going on here is that at the same time that we see a fundamental transformation taking place inside the country by people that are basically not respectful of the tradition of this country, they're adding to the weight of that by bringing other people in who also would have the same distance from those traditions because they were not born here, and so you are adding the numbers of people who will be dissidents to the things that were written by the founding fathers. And I think that's a lot of what is taking place here.
I just had a recent conversation with people, and they were supporting federal agencies such as the FBI and all this stuff. And I keep on bringing up the point to these people. I hold up that little document that you have one too, the Constitution. I said, can you show me where in this thing allows for the creation of a group that spies on its own people?
Yeah.
Can you tell me where it's at? Because you same people, a lot of these FBI agents, they'll say, I'm a patriot, and they'll have the little flag on their lapel and stuff. And what? Well, can you tell me where this is at? And like, well, we're doing good, but you can't tell me. There was a creation of the post office as well in the Constitution, as well as for the patent office and the customs office. That's the only things like that was actually allowed from the onset of the country. Not the spying organizations, not this deep cabal groups that we now pretty much accept carte blanche as part of the American scene. Okay, but yet, and these people are supposed to be patriots, and yet when you bring that up to them, they're like silent. They can't. Then they get furious because you're questioning their patriotism, but they're certainly not patriotic by the constitutional standards.
I don't think that there's anything in our Constitution that allows for all of this banditry that we have through these agencies. I'm looking at the NSA, the FISA court. Where is any of that mandated in the laws and traditions of this country? And this use of this language has changed in this country. Words like homeland. Where do we hear? Where is this word in our traditions? Homeland security.
Because we're supposed to be a republic, not an empire.
Yeah.
And the homeland does refer to being an empire situation.
Yes.
That's what it means.
Deutschland. I mean, I heard the first time I heard someone talking about the homeland was the words used between 33 and 45 in Nazi Germany. And you have a lot of this language now that's being used in this country, and it's like we are hearing a lot of language that does not lend itself to a democratic kind of orientation, but one in which we are moving toward more of a statist orientation. And our language is, in fact, exhibiting that. I think it's also what was said by David Kapelian. We also are saying the dismantling of the American mind. His book was called The Snapping of the American Mind. And the way you snap a country from its own mind, the mind in which we were in based on our traditions, is to in fact take those traditions away and put something else in its place. And so I don't even think we have to talk about what party is to blame for this shutdown. We have to stop talking about the Democrats and Republicans, because they have given that language to the American people. They don't abide by that language. These people are statists.
What they remind me of, when I was a kid, I was always like, my dad watched wrestling, professional wrestling on TV. Back then, it was really kind of cheesy, cheesy. It's always cheesy, but anyway, I was like, God, these people hate each other. My dad says, no, you'll see them actually in the limos, driving around town, partying together before and after the matches and stuff. And so basically, it's all a show. It's a dog and pony show. Like, I suppose they're all lining their own pockets. They're just getting it from different sources, but it's all a game to these people. That's all it is. And they don't take there's no true shred of patriotism I see in any of these people. No sense of actually caring about the rest of their fellow citizens. It's a game. They're played in it, and it's the powers. I mean, it's all about power. It's all it's about. Everything, they might get groomed. They might say the right things during election time for their constituency or proposed constituency, but it's a game for these people. It's no different than a pure, professional wrestling match. That's all it is.
They are playing games with the American people, and we have got to pay attention to what they're doing. The game is up. They are now being exposed, coming out of the woodwork, and be that as it may, say what you want to about Donald Trump. What Donald Trump has done is that he's flushed these people out, so they had to come out and defend their real interests, and their interests are not the American people. If that were the case, you would not see them talking about shutting the government down that serves the American people, and you're shutting it down on an issue that has nothing to do with the citizens of this country. And why would that be the case, that they would put persons above the citizens of the country and then close it down on a issue that has nothing to do with the people who are legally in this country? And then we're talking about dreamers. Has anybody asked this question? Okay, let's assume that these are dreamers. What are they dreaming about? I mean, we keep talking about D.A.C.A. We want to have they say 800,000. John was saying before he came on the air today, it's about 3 million persons probably in that whole pool. And they want us to make us think that they're all young people thinking these are 6-year-old, 8-year-old persons. Many of these people are in their 30s. And they're talking about they are dreamers. Now, they don't call them illegal aliens, because they will put a different spin on it. And if the people were told they were here illegally, then because we are people that believe in following the law, not necessarily our leaders believe that, but we believe that as the citizens of this country, following the laws of the land. Most of us are law-abiding. So they don't tell us they're here illegally, put these names on it. Whenever they want to fool us into a false notion of what we're doing, they tell us that these persons are something other than what they are, or they name it something that is not. And so these are dreamers. Okay, fine, they're dreaming. So what are they dreaming about? And what dreams do they have they can't dream about in their own country? And this idea that the ones that are here, you hear this as a defense, the ones that are here are not more prone to be more lawless than the people that are here illegally. Okay, fine. I'm glad to hear that. But they're here illegally, and therefore that's that's not being law-abiding, because they broke the law to get here. And I don't know of any other law you can break, and if you don't break any further laws, the law that you broke then is forgiven because you did no additional damage. But in this case here, if they break into the country, which is a violation of our laws, and also a violation more so of something else even more egregious, and that's a violation of the sovereignty of the country. And then they say, well, they got here and they're not more prone to violate the laws of the land than those who are the average Joe Blow citizen of the country, and therefore that should legitimate their presence. But if they don't violate any of the laws, they violated the law to get here. And if we're going to start legalizing illegality, then you have a problem here in terms of where does it stop? I don't know of any laws that they're willing to forgive any American citizens for. If they don't commit any further laws, the laws they violate, therefore it's forgiven. But that's what they're applying as a standard in terms of those not citizens of the country, and that's a problem for us. If we're going to be a law-abiding nation, we're going to have to decide that we're going to enforce all the laws. And if we don't like the laws in the books, we have to change the laws. We can't just do it arbitrarily and decide we're going to enforce these laws over here, but we're not going to enforce the laws over there. We're just going to pick and choose what laws we're going to enforce and then call ourselves a law-abiding country. It doesn't work that way. Either all the laws have to be applied evenly to all the citizens, no big shots, no small shots, no persons avoiding the law and getting away with it, and no persons violating the laws, and then that will be something that we will in fact turn our back on just because of their position and stations in life. We can't do that as a nation.
You know what I'm seeing?
And be a civilized country.
Now, I'm not saying he's got this grandness and he's got this, like the saintliness, but he kind of, what I was saying, I was just looking to make sure I had the right person, but Thomas Becket, he became the Archbishop of Canterbury, back in the, like early on. His friend the king put him in position because he thought he was be easy to control. And Donald Trump is a businessman. He is, on base it, he's not much different than the politicians. He's always seeking, he was always a Democrat beforehand. But now he seems to be in the position of the position he's in, and he's actually responding to the American people's wishes, and he's being skewered by all sides. His own party, the Democratic Party, because he's actually fallen through with a large portion of the population's desires. And I'm not saying he's like a saint. I'm not saying that, but there's a kind of a parallel between what he's doing right now, and let's face it, he was a player in the Democratic Party for New York and New Jersey most of his life. He became a Republican just to run for this office. And of course, he did say disparaging remarks about Republicans in the past. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. He did. He said basically, their voters will vote for anything. So, but Hillary Clinton said something like that to the Democrats too at one point. But a lot of ways there's kind of a parallel between him and Beckett's character. Becket used to wench and drink and party with the king. He'd say, "Hey, I'm going to make you the Archbishop." He begged him not to because he said, "I'm going to take this role seriously." And that's exactly that's a lot like what Trump's doing. Is he's taking the role as president and listening to American people seriously. And where everybody else say, "Hey, we have our own agenda, man. We got them to buy it." They put us in office, and hey, screw the rest of them. And that's what their attitude seems to be.
Yeah, I voted for Donald Trump. And the more time passes, the greater my respect becomes for this president. And I know that doesn't play well because the press has told us that Donald Trump is a misogynist, he's a racist, he's a sexist, his health is bad. His health is bad.
Well, any other
die in the job.
He actually submitted to a cognitive test. Now, has any other prior president allowed himself to have to submit to something? I never remember anybody having to be put on them as president. Matter of fact, there's sacrosanct. You're just supposed to accept this. He allowed that to happen to him. I never heard any other president having to be have to submit to that. And
it's unprecedented. Stephen Cohen, who is professor emeritus at one of the major universities, I think George Washington University, said he has never seen anything like this in terms of the media being so askance of following any kind of protocols of journalism. And I've never seen anything like it. But the more they throw mud on this president, the more he seems to find a way to make lemonade out of a lemon. In other words, the president seems to be able to take the mudslinging and use it to his advantage. This president does not seem to be faced by it. And I was noticing just in the shutdown, for example, he was talking about, they were saying this was Donald Trump's shutdown. Donald Trump wasn't taking that laying down. He was saying this was the Schumer. Chuck Schumer is the minority leader in the Senate, and he was saying this was the Schumer shutdown. I don't even know how you can claim the president shutting down the government. He's not part of the negotiations in the Senate. This is all about those 100 members that would be there to decide what they're going to put in the president's desk. If the president doesn't sign it, then that's another matter. But as long as the negotiation goes on in the Senate and they have not come up with a plan, that's not the president that's doing that. That's the members in that body that is in fact doing it. And some of it is kind of like out of the people's purview. We have got to pay more attention as American people of how they finesse the things they're doing in Washington, so we cannot catch them at these games that they play. For example, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the Senate the 60 vote that's needed to pass legislation in this country. In fact, I think that if you go and look at the Constitution, wherever a majority was not required to pass anything, the Constitution would specify when it required more than a majority voice. For example, in terms of treaties, it would say 2/3 of the senators, right? Or when it comes down to impeachment, it would say then that you have to have 2/3 vote of the senators to bring about the conviction of the impeachment, or 2/3 removal of a judge. So whenever a majority was not required, it would specify then that you have to have what will amount to a supermajority. But here's something that the members of the Senate did to themselves. They imposed a 60-vote majority to pass legislation in the Senate. That's not in the Constitution, and it goes outside of the constitutional vision of the framers. I'll read it to you. Okay, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll come back with WFOV in 4 minutes, and we welcome you back at that time. For the program here, we will continue what we're saying, but let me read something to you from the Constitution. I'll read it, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 1. And let me read what it says here about the business of the Congress. And it'll talk about majority, the majority vote. Let me read this. It's Article 1, Section 5. Let me read this to you. It says, each house shall be the judge of the elections, the returns and qualifications of his own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum. Listen to this very carefully. And a majority of each, meaning a majority of the members of the Senate and a majority of the members of the House, shall constitute a quorum to do business. Now that's what the Constitution requires. A majority is required to do business. So then where does this 60-vote rule come from, and what is it designed to do? And I'm going to give you Moss's analysis of it. It's designed to disenfranchise the American people, because you vote for one of the two parties to be in the majority. But if they can hide behind the fact that it takes a supermajority to get anything done, then the disenfranchisement can go on, where you are electing the officials, one majority party over another majority party, but they can't do it on their own, and so majority voice does not come through, regardless of what the voters say. Yet the Constitution requires a majority to do business, based on Article 1, Section 5, Clause 1. Now in 1970, you saw where Mansfield, what's Mansfield's first name? Mike Mansfield. I think that they saw at that time that they had a problem here, because what was happening was that when they had a filibuster, all the other business of the Senate was stopped, because the filibuster was holding up Congress from doing any of the business. So in 1970, I think they saw the problem more specific to how this impugns Article 1, Section 5, Clause 1, because it says majority to do the business. But if you shut the business down by a supermajority, that seems to be in conflict with the Constitution. So they tried to rectify it, and they created a two-tier process in the closure rule. In other words, when you had the filibuster going on, where it takes 60 votes to close the filibuster down, what they did was open up a two-tiered process, so the filibuster could go on. At the same time, there will be some time put aside to do the rest of the Senate's business, so the filibuster doesn't close it down. Therefore, it's not directly contradictory to the Senate. The Senate is still functioning, in other words, do its other business while the filibuster is going on. So open a two-tiered process in order to get around the fact they put something in their rules. Is Senate Rule 22. Where they have this rule now where they can filibuster a bill, and it takes a supermajority to shut the filibuster down. 60 votes, 3/5 of the Senate to shut it down. And then you got to vote on it. which is really quite something, isn't it? In terms of, you would first of all vote to close the debate. Okay, we're back now with allpointstv.com and also WFOV, and we're very glad to have you back. I was just saying here that you would it really requires a double count of voice in the Senate. First of all, to vote closure, and then to vote on the bill itself. That's never intended by the framers. And so this closure rule is a very, how would I put this? A very backdoor approach. It's a deep state approach to disenfranchising the American voters, because we have majorities in both the House and the Senate. But in the Senate, you have to have a supermajority. If the party that's a minority party disagrees with what's being voted upon, they can close it down and frustrate the majority. And the framers did not intend to have the minority shutting down the majority voice. In other words, shutting down the democratic process, because the idea is the majority voice will carry the day. And they now have it so that a minority voice can shut down the majority voice. And that was not intended by the framers. And you see that in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 1 of the Constitution. So they do a lot of things behind our back. We don't catch them because we don't pay a lot of attention to how they are doing the business in Washington. We assume these persons are better at what they're doing than we are. They're not especially gifted with anything that we don't have in the general public. And the general public needs to pay more attention to what they're doing, because they're disenfranchising the American people on a regular basis. Our voice is not heard in Washington. And nothing that we are saying out here is going to stop them until we take the bull by the horn and we have a constant turnover of these elected officials. They don't think we're going to turn them out. And I brought to the studio the Senate seats up for grabs in 2018. And I was counting the number of blue states and the number of red states that are up for re-election in this year. November, we're going to have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only 8 red states, the red states would be the Republican states, would have their senators up for re-election. So 16 senators from the red states. And since there are 33 or 34 states every 2 years where the senators up for re-election, that means the rest of the senators up for re-election would be Democrats. That means that we had then 16 Republicans, and then since we got 34 states that would have the senators up for re-election, subtract the 8 states from 34 states, and you had 24 states that would be up for re-election, where the senators up for re-election in the blue states, the Democratic states. So isn't it interesting that in this election year, 31 members of the 32 members, somewhere around there, of the Republicans are stepping down this year. Why would that be the case? 31 members. Orrin Hatch is stepping down. Flake is stepping down. These aren't Donald Trump supporters, by the way. Jeff Flake is stepping down from Tennessee. Orrin Hatch in Utah. And Cornyn, I think Cornyn is from I think he's from Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. I could check that, but these senators are stepping down, and so they're making it much more difficult for the Republicans to hold on to the Senate and hold on to the House, because of all the persons are volunteering to give their seats up. But why are they doing that? Pay attention to what is going on here. These people, more than anything else, I mean, they call themselves Democrats and they call themselves Republicans, but more than anything else, these people are statists.
Orrin Hatch, I remember years ago he proposed creation of kiddie care for health care for kids, and he wanted to prop it up by taxes on cigarettes. But the reason why they put high taxes on cigarettes is to discourage people from smoking. So if it had its desired effect, where would the money now coming from all these people? And I saw that right then when he proposed that. He was a statist. I mean, if they had a desired effect of getting people to stop, the vice tax on that, and people stop smoking, you're still going to have all these people now dependent on the program, which is now sagging behind and needing funding. So it means another portion of the income of somebody else would have to be brought in to prop that up. So right then, this is like 20-some years ago, back when I think when the Clintons were, in office, when he proposed that, it was like basically a epiphany that this man is a statist, So I'm glad he's stepping down. I really do. I am.
Well, they are statists, and they revel in the club. They're two. They say Democrats and Republicans. It really is a club. It's a duopoly where you have two sides of the same statist group. That is, say they believe in the state. And so everything must therefore be empowered through the state, which is why they are taking over more and more control of the private sector. 1/6 was taken over with Obamacare. In 2009, we had Obamacare put in place where they took over 1/16 of the economy, 1/8 of the economy was taken over. 16%, I should say, of the economy was taken over through the health care.
And the people, I don't know if they've been watching the news, and this is not Fox News. This is on General News. It's on the BBC as well, which is because it's affecting in Britain, which has got this socialized medicine, all non-essential operations, and some of them are not they're not essential means like life-threatening, but this should be done. Over 50,000 to 80,000 or something like that had to be canceled because of the backlog. So I mean, this system does not work, and they always told it Britain is the greatest thing, and Canada's got serious issues, but the press doesn't allow it to be covered.
Yeah.
They don't allow it to be covered.
Yeah, anybody can save you $2,500, which is how they sold Obamacare. They told us that it would save $2,500 per family, and it would be more cost efficient for the government to take it over than it would be in the private sector, where competition would in fact help regulate the prices, because when you're doing things through the private sector, then the competition drives prices down, because you can drive the other person out of business if he's not competitive. Well, and so they were telling us that government can make the healthcare more efficient.
Well, see, they coached it too. The socialists, the conscientious people, I guess you'd call it, misguided as they may be, try to coach it as like you're denying access to healthcare. No, the question boils down who's paying for whose healthcare. That's what the question is. Not everybody can. If you got money, obviously you have access to healthcare. So that's like, and let's face it, if you made it more broad, the more like a competitive based, people would be vying. Nowadays, is actually Obamacare actually kind of destroy the chances of actually getting a good deal from an insurance company, because they know now that a lot of people now it's going to remove just buying anything to avoid the penalty. So basically, they were offering any kind of crap product, being the coverage is a product, and they had to be content with it, because they want to avoid the penalty and the heat of the IRS breathing down their necks. So
government is best that government's least, and when they're taking over more and more of the private sector, doing things that the private sector should be doing, you can believe the cost will in fact go up. The reason why you're shutting the government down, and I hear everybody talking about the Democrats are responsible, the Republicans are responsible. Look, these are statists. The ones responsible to shut down are the statists. The politicians are responsible. And we have to get away from this line of demarcation between these people and see them as a group that is in fact organized against the American people. And this idea that they're Democrats, look those words up. The word Democrat means something. And if they are Republicans, that word means something also. And you have to look at those words and find out, if you don't already know, find out what those words mean. And then ask yourself, who are those persons in either one of those two parties? Who is the Democrat and Democratic Party? I know what they call themselves, but who are the Democrats? The Republicans, that also has a meaning to it. In Article 1, Section 4, it says that every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. Okay, what is a Republican form of government? And is that what we see in Washington, where they are in fact ensuring that we would have a Republican form of government in Washington, D.C.? You see any Republicanism up there in Washington, D.C.? You see any Democratic carrying on in the Senate, for example? We were talking about the supermajority. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 1, requires a majority vote to do business. They are the ones who imposed Rule 22 and made it so that you would have a supermajority do business in the Senate. And that's why they were shutting it down. Well, they're creating crises. Let me read something to you from this book here by Thomas DeLorenzo called Organized Crime. The subtitle of the book, The Unvarnished Truth About Government. Here are some conclusions made by DeLorenzo. Number one, in government, failure is success. In other words, in order for government to justify its intrusion into the affairs of the American people, there must be a reason for that intrusion. And failure, therefore, is success. Why is it success? Because when there is a problem, government invites itself into that void to fix the problem, which many times government is in fact creating the problem, so it comes in to fix it. Another issue that's raised by DeLorenzo, government, he says here that politicians will rarely, if ever, assume responsibility for any of the problems that they cause with bad policies. Much of the problems we have in this country, in fact, most problems on the globe. Politicians are a global problem. You can go. I'll be in South Africa pretty soon, and I will be there for to look at what's happened since the apartheid came to an end. I want to do a study of that, and I'm going to do to look at the Zuma administration. Jacob Zuma is now the president of South Africa, and the second ANC president. I'm going to go into I'm going into KwaZulu airport. I'll be named after the Zulu king Shaka, and I'll be landing in that airport in Durban. But I'm going there because I want to see what the government has done in the aftermath of all this crying about how bad apartheid was, and see if the conditions have improved in South Africa after the takeover by the majority in South Africa. Since all the person around the world were talking about majority rule, okay, you got majority rule. Let's see how they're doing there. And I don't want anybody to tell me what the situation is. I'm going to see it for myself. But I will tell you that the problem is that once they got rid of one form of government, they put politicians in there, and that's why nothing improves, because politicians are the problem wherever they are, and it's no less the problem here in this country than it is anywhere else. Politicians are, by the very design of what they do, they're parasites, and basically they're thugs. That's no less a case here than it is anywhere else. And if you call them what John Kennedy did down in Louisiana, and you called them the way he said that the government was created by geniuses, meaning the founding fathers, and it's now run by idiots, I wouldn't disagree with that. But I go one step further and say that not only are they idiots, they also are thugs. Politicians are basically thugs, and they will in fact do things that justify their existence and their relevance, because basically politicians are not relevant. They don't produce anything, and they're not relevant. They make themselves relevant. But the only person that really are relevant in a society are those that produce something. Those are the relevant ones. The politicians are what Ayn Rand calls them. They are basically Attila. People of force, and they force their way into the lives of the people, and they extract wealth from them under the penalty of incarceration. And that's the way the governments operate around the world. It's not just true here, and it's that way around the world. And when I go into these countries, I go there to look at that, to see how does it operate any differently anywhere else in the world than it operates here. And it doesn't operate anything anywhere different. The only reason that this country was able to get off the ground in the first place is because we had the implied limitation of government in the lives of its people, which was followed up until the mid part of the 19th century. We had laissez-faire economics. As long as we had the government hands off of the economy to a large extent, we were able to, in fact, get this engine off the ground. But now that the government has become intrusive, you see what is happening to this country right now. Let me give you a number here. They're talking about the government shutdown because of what? Why did the government shut down based upon I know they said D.A.C.A. That's another cover-up. The reason why the government shut down is it ran out of money. You know, why does government shut down? They're talking about D.A.C.A, right? They're saying D.A.C.A is the lessening the deportation. It's called the deportation of the portion of the arrival of children, so that the D.A.C.A would be a suspension of the deportation of the arrival of children. And so they say that it was shut down because of D.A.C.A. Well, you know, D.A.C.A, that it is the issue that was raised, but the real reason why the shutdown occurred is because the government ran out of money. Otherwise, why would you shut the government down? The government cannot pay its bills. So what does it do? I mean, I know this ain't D.A.C.A, but the fact is that the shutdown occurred because the government ran out of funds for that which it funded when it funded it in 2013. When they had the last shutdown, they raised the debt ceiling.
Another thing is, too,
and what they're getting ready to do now is raise the debt ceiling again.
This whole thing about D.A.C.A and all this stuff actually brings the point, one of the few things the government was supposed to be entrusted with is, you know, border security and all this stuff. They failed. And because they were such a big failure, and they permitted such a massive group of people come in, now we have to see this is becoming a big problem for us. They failed in the oversight they had at that time when we had a more minimalistic government, but now they want to trust us to actually allow this other stuff, to take them to assume responsibility over more things in our life. When they failed, this whole very D.A.C.A itself is actually an indication they can't handle what they're supposed to be handling. It's
John, they took up last year. Let me quote this number to the listeners and the viewers. Last year, the government took in revenue of $3.654 trillion. There will be $3,654 billion. That's with a B. $3,654 billion last year. And despite that revenue, which was the largest amount of revenue in this country's history, they still managed to spend more than $200 billion more than what they took in. In other words, it doesn't matter how much revenue they take in, because the government is so bloated that it still will be unable to live within its means.
Another thing is, too, I just read that they got private contractors collecting debt from taxpayers, and these private contractors cost more than the money they were supposed to be bringing in if they got the full amount from the taxpayers. So that just goes to show it's not about revenue; it's just purely punitive.
Yeah,
that's what it is, and control.
Yeah, they will not rein in government because they don't want to rein in the control that amount of expenditure will, in fact, bring about. In other words, they're paying for influence and they're paying for power. So government is bloated for a reason. It's bloated because government wants its hands in all of the things that are operational in this country, and they don't plan to pull government back. That's why you haven't repealed Obamacare, and they're not going to repeal Obamacare. Once government takes power, and it takes some power from the people, because the power is in the hands of the people. Government of the people. Once they take power from the people, they don't give the government back. They don't give the power back. Once they take the taxes, they don't cut any taxes in this country. There was no tax break in this country. There was a tax transference. They transferred the amount of taxation from the immediate the people that are paying taxes now. They took the taxes off of them and placed it into the future where you can't see it. You don't get a tax break in this country. It was a diversion of taxes from those who are paying taxes to putting a tax upon your children. That's what if you notice it, they said that when they had the tax break, they said that the deficit went up by $1.4 trillion. So what does that mean? Does it mean there was a tax break? No, it means that there was a tax transfer. They transferred the taxes. You're supposed to have the parents, right, paying for the children. They have the children paying for the they have the children paying for the parents.
See, as far as back as what we owe everybody, they're actually having your great grandkid paying for you. That's what it is.
Yes,
and that's bad because I don't have any kids. So I guess I'm deadbeating somebody else into it.
You're defeating the system by that. But they have placed that tax into the future. But you see, the problem is what Mises talks about. There's a book I brought to the studio called The Theory of Money and Credit. And one of the points, this is a book written in 1912 by this great Austrian economist by the name of Ludwig von Mises. A book that was written in 1912 was translated into English in 1934. So for 2 decades, we didn't have access to what he had written in this marvelous book called The Theory of Money and Credit. And we listened over here to this madman named John Maynard Keynes, who was running, we were pretty much following him. And that's what got a lot of these economists in turmoil right now, following the Keynesian economic view. But what the theory of money and credit is, what Mises said was that they put things off into the long term and go with the short term. So that's what you had with them putting the taxes, for example. They put it into the long term. The problem, though, is what Mises says, is that you don't know how long the short term will last. And we are now meeting the short term. You know, you put stuff in the future, but you don't know how quickly that future will get here. Well, the problem is that the short term, which they took the short term solution by placing the problems into the future, we didn't know how long the short term would last. But guess what's happened here? The short term is now here. And we are now going to have to pay the piper, and that's going to be a problem because these debts are becoming due, and this postponing of the wealth, taking wealth, what it really is taking wealth out of the future. You're borrowing from the future and borrowing that wealth and paying for the prosperity in the present, which is what politicians do. They hide their theft. That's what they're doing. You see, they steal from the taxpayers. Theft is anything you take by force, right? So they steal from the taxpayers in the present, but they steal all of what it takes to run the government in the present with all the entitlement programs. They'll be revoked. So what they do is they do some of the theft now, and they do some of the theft in the future, so it cannot be seen. And those persons are not even born yet, many of them, so there is no objection to it. But your $20 trillion debt is a theft of the taxpayers in the future. They call it deficit spending, but it's really taxation into the future. And you can call it what you want to. You can hide it under these names. States have a lot of names for things they're doing, so as to hide it from the American people, because if the American people understood it, they would object to it. If they knew that dreamers are people that are here illegally, they would object to it. But they support the persons because who's against dreaming? So they call them dreamers. These people are here illegally. And we're either going to be a nation of laws or we're not going to be a nation of laws. But you can't have it both ways, where you have people breaking the country and they're going to become legally once they get here.
Besides, if they're not willing to partake and go through the process of being tracked, and when they're here, it's going to be chaotic as hell to try to track them then. And so that means they're not going to be contributing to the tax base. They're They're going to be living free and clear of that. So, I mean, if they're not trackable now, they're not going to be trackable in the future. They're not going to submit to that. They already haven't submitted to it. You know, so
if they would put them in the basement of the politician, I tell you right now, you would have that problem resolved overnight, and you wouldn't have D.A.C.A, you wouldn't have any of these things they have in terms of the welfare state, because it because they came out of the politician's pocket, they would in fact not have it as a part of the national policy. But as long as they can pass the burden off on the taxpayers, it comes out of the taxpayers' pocket, they don't have a problem with that, because they would have an advantage in it. Those persons that come here on the welfare state would vote for those who are giving those benefits. But those benefits are not given by the politicians. And I just love this word they've created, free health care. As if doctors are not charging for their services, and as if when you go to the drugstore, those drugs in that store are free just because you're not paying it up front. Those drugs are paid for by the people that they tax. They tax that money already. And some of it is being paid in this futuristic thing where they're postponing the payment into the future, as I was talking about just a bit earlier here. They say the money that they are paying for it, you don't see it. But it's being paid for. It's not free. I just say nothing is free except air. But you go to the service station now, not that you're getting the services at the service station. Everything now is you get out there and pump your own gas. And if your windows need cleaning, you better get out there and do it yourself. Your windows will not be clean. There's no service there. And the air, you have to get out there now and pump the air, and the air even costs. Because that's not free. When they say the free health care, no, it's paid for by the taxation that they have, and you're paying for it through them taxing. And some of the tax is out of sight, so you don't see that, so you don't object to it, but you tax enough already. The Tea Party tax enough already, and they are very clever in what they're doing here. And they're running out of money, and now what they're getting ready to do is raise the debt ceiling again to another level, and they're going to do it up until March, because the March 5th, the D.A.C.A comes up for renewal, and they will not have a debate on that at that time. But the taxpayers are being taxed to pay for these things the government is in fact doing, and they're going to be stopped before the country is torn completely apart by these politicians. Okay, we got to get out of here. Running over time. Want to thank you for staying tuned for the last hour, and we will see you next week. Don't forget to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.